You're dismissed. That's what my son told me, right in front of everyone, after all these years building up his empire together. My own flesh and blood, the boy I raised and trusted, stood tall in his Dallas skyscraper office and kicked me out like I was just another obsolete tool. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just nodded, picked up one folder, one that would prove he wasn't the golden boy everyone believed, and I left, closing the door gently behind me. I knew Monday would be a day to remember. The reports slapped onto Carter's glass desk, the numbers all wrong, the questions growing louder in my head. Carter, my only son, named after my father, didn't even bother looking up from his computer. He kept on typing, his back straight in that custom Texas-cut suit, all confidence and modern arrogance. Outside the 45th floor windows, the city of Dallas glimmered in the hot afternoon sun, as if the whole world was moving forward and I'd somehow been left behind. "Dad, you don't understand today's business world," Carter finally said, not even looking my way. His voice was as cold as the steel furniture in that office. I wanted to remind him how many storms I'd weathered, how many companies I'd rescued from the brink, but I kept my voice even, my expression calm. "These projections, Carter, if your investors see these numbers." He spun his chair around fast, fixing me with a glare that once belonged to the little boy who begged for my help, but now carried nothing but distance. "Your methods are 2 decades out of date. I don't need lectures. I need results." The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic and the ticking of that fancy watch he wore. I remembered a different time, Carter's first office, me helping him secure his first business loan, the look in his eyes when he called late at night, desperate for advice. Those days felt like another life. I tried to steady my hands, gathering the stained financial documents and slipping them into my old leather briefcase. My own son, the one who once shared every hope and dream with me, now stood as a stranger behind his modern desk. "I'll review the numbers with the compliance team," I said, choosing dignity over conflict. "Do what you need to do." Dismissal, final and cold. I walked out, my footsteps echoing down the long, polished hallway, past portraits of business titans, past photos of Carter with celebrities and politicians, all smiles and handshakes. Not so long ago, we would have been in those photos together. The door shut behind me with a soft click, leaving Carter's reflection in the glass, cold and distant. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught a last look at the city. Dallas had never seemed so big, or so empty. But that wasn't the end of it. An hour later, in the boardroom, a place I'd practically lived in for the last 20 years, I noticed something off in Carter's entrance. He walked in like a man with a secret, like a general about to launch an attack. I braced myself, but nothing could have prepared me for what he did next. "I've made a decision about the company's future," Carter announced, voice sharp as a knife. "Effective immediately, Samuel Reed will no longer be part of Lone Star Capital." You could have heard a pin drop. The room, full of board members, men and women who'd seen me work late nights and put my heart into this company, stared in stunned silence. Old friends, now silent witnesses to my public execution. One woman, Margaret Hall, who'd served on the board since the early days, started to protest, but Carter cut her off. "This is a business decision. My father will be compensated, but it's time for change." It was like a punch to the gut. Decades of sacrifice, countless sleepless nights, millions invested, even my own retirement on the line, and this was how it ended. I stood slowly, determined not to give Carter the satisfaction of seeing me break. "Best of luck, son," I said, voice steady. He didn't even blink. As I left the room, the faces around the table looked away, embarrassed by the spectacle. The elevator ride down felt endless, the marble floors beneath my feet cold and unfamiliar. By the time I reached my office, cardboard boxes were already stacked by the door. Someone had planned for this, maybe Carter himself. I began packing up my life piece by piece. Photos of Carter's college graduation, family vacations in Colorado, a trophy from my first business deal. Each item felt heavier than the last. That's when I found it, the folder buried deep in my desk marked 2009. My wife, Helen, always said to keep everything. Inside were documents Carter had forgotten, loan agreements, investment records, emails begging for help during the crash. Proof that without me, there never would have been a Lone Star Capital at all. The phone rang, Helen's worried voice on the line. "Sam, are you all right? There are rumors." I looked out at the city, at the skyline we built together. "Carter fired me, Helen. In front of everyone." There was a pause, her breath catching. "Come home. We'll talk it through." But I knew, even then, that the battle had just begun. I sat alone in my now half-empty office as the city lights flickered on, thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. I looked at the folder I'd found, old contracts, emails, and desperate notes Carter had scrawled to me in another life. All those years of late-night talks, bailing him out, guiding him through every storm, suddenly erased by a boardroom announcement and a cold nod. Packing became a ritual, a way to steady my hands. Helen's voice still rang in my ears, warm and soothing, even through her worry. "Come home, Sam. We'll figure it out." If only it were that simple. I wrapped up our wedding photo, tucking it between ledgers and faded receipts. Everything I touched brought back memories. Carter's first bike, paid for with a bonus from a hard-fought deal. The college diploma I'd framed for him, proud as any father could be. Now all of it felt like relics of a past life. As I lifted the last box, I heard the echo of footsteps in the hall. The building was nearly empty, but I knew those footsteps. Carter. He opened the door, face tight, eyes cool and unreadable. "Dad," he said, keeping his voice low. "Security wants you out by 8. Company policy." He avoided my eyes, looking instead at the boxes, the packed-up history. "Don't forget to turn in the Lincoln's keys." Not even a thank you. I nodded, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a fight. I knew something Carter didn't. I had the documents, the proof of every sacrifice, every loan, and, more importantly, the proof of what he'd done lately. That folder in my briefcase was heavier than gold. Evidence, not just of a lifetime of work, but of Carter's secrets. Once he left, I took my time. I walked the halls one last time, nodding at the night janitor who'd watched me build this place from nothing. Outside, I placed the car keys on the security desk and stepped out into the warm Dallas night. Helen was waiting for me at home, her hair grayer now, but her eyes still fierce and kind. She wrapped her arms around me without a word. We sat on the porch, letting the Texas air settle our nerves. "I know you," Helen said softly, taking my hand. "You're not going to let this go." I smiled, but it felt tired. "No, I'm not." The next morning, after a sleepless night, I called my oldest friend, David McAllister, a lawyer with roots deep in Texas soil and a reputation for standing by his word. He listened carefully as I laid out the story, the firing, the documents, the feeling that Carter's ambitions had crossed the line from bold to reckless. David met me in his office, a quiet room filled with old books and sunlight. "Sam, if what you're saying is true, it's not just a family squabble. It could be criminal." I slid the documents across his desk. Carter's hidden financials, the discrepancies between what the company reported to the SEC and what they promised to investors, Carter's own notes about growth targets. That seemed too good to be true. David's face hardened as he read, flipping through the evidence, checking numbers, connecting the dots. "You realize what this means, don't you?" he said. "If these projections were shown to investors knowing they were false, that's fraud, securities fraud, plain and simple. That's federal prison territory." The words hit me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't come here just to vent, Dave. I came to do what's right. If Carter wants to play dirty, he's going to learn what consequences look like. He nodded. You're a good man, Sam. I'll handle the whistleblower paperwork for the SEC. But you need to be ready. This is going to get messy. It could take months. Carter could lose everything. So could you. I looked out the window, thinking of all those investors, the employees whose livelihoods depended on Lone Star Capital. If I let this slide, a lot more people could get hurt. I'd never forgive myself. That afternoon, the paperwork began. David prepared the complaint, making copies of every document and building a timeline. My phone buzzed every few minutes, messages from old colleagues, from reporters sniffing around, even from Carter's assistant, asking for my side of the story. I ignored them all. Helen made coffee, her steady presence grounding me. I hope Carter learns from this, she whispered. I hope he remembers what it means to be a Reed. As the Texas sun dipped behind the trees, I realized the days ahead would be the hardest of my life. But I'd taught Carter to fight for what's right, even if now that fight meant going up against my own son. For the first time since I left that glass tower, I felt something close to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this storm would clear the air and remind everyone what truly matters. Monday morning arrived thick with tension. I barely slept, replaying the conversation with David and the memory of Carter's cold words. As the sun rose over the suburbs of Dallas, I sat at the kitchen table, drinking bitter black coffee. Helen set her hand on mine, her grip steady. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you, Sam. I left the house with the old briefcase clutched in my hand. The streets were already filling with workers, folks just trying to get by, just like I always had. My old pickup rumbled down the highway, past the skyline Carter and I had once dreamed about together. David's office felt different that day. The air was thick with the gravity of what we were about to do. He had a file ready, every document copied, every number checked, every memo from Carter that I'd found, scanned and preserved. We sat together in front of David's computer, filing the anonymous complaint to the SEC. David made sure my name wouldn't appear anywhere until absolutely necessary. Still, my heart beat fast as we sent off the digital packet that would, without question, bring Lone Star Capital under a microscope. Afterward, we sat in silence. I watched David, his eyes focused, jaw clenched in concentration as he reviewed one last time. He finally looked up, voice quiet. It's done, Sam. Now we wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Days crawled by, each one filled with worry and guilt. I'd taught Carter to be tough, but had I taught him to be honest? Had I pushed him too hard, or not hard enough? My phone rang, but I let the calls go to voicemail. I walked the block every morning, waving to neighbors, trying to keep up appearances, all the while feeling the storm gathering just over the horizon. Late Wednesday afternoon, as Helen and I were finishing dinner, the doorbell rang. Standing there on the porch was an agent in a dark suit, a federal investigator, as straight-backed and polite as you'd expect from someone who's seen more fraud than truth. Mr. Reed? She asked, flashing her badge. I'm Special Agent Jennifer Hall from the Securities and Exchange Commission. May we speak inside? Helen brought coffee, her hands only trembling slightly. I led Agent Hall to the study, where sunlight slanted across the shelves filled with family photos and business awards. She sat down, notebook open. Her manner was calm, but I could see in her eyes that she already knew the seriousness of what I'd reported. Mr. Reed, thank you for contacting us. The documents you provided were substantial. Can you tell me exactly how you discovered the discrepancies? I told her the truth. I explained how I'd been forced out of my own company by my son, how I'd found the hidden folder while packing up my office, how the numbers didn't match, how Carter's own handwriting proved the fraud. She listened closely, asking precise questions about timing, about Carter's access, about who else might know. She took the original documents, bagged them as evidence, and assured me they'd be protected. You understand this is a criminal investigation, Mr. Reed. You may be called as a witness. Do you have any concerns about your safety or about retaliation? I hesitated, looking out the window at the magnolia trees Helen and I planted after Carter was born. Carter's ambitious, I said at last. But he's not dangerous. Still, I know this won't be easy for anyone. Agent Hall nodded. You did the right thing. The SEC will handle this quietly at first, but if the evidence checks out, there'll be more questions, more interviews, and probably federal charges. She handed me her card. If Carter or anyone from Lone Star Capital contacts you, call me immediately. After she left, Helen and I sat in the quiet living room, staring at nothing in particular. For the first time, the house felt too big, too empty. My hands shook, not with fear, but with the weight of what I'd set in motion. The next morning, I drove out to the old Reed Ranch, just a patch of land west of the city that I kept for moments like these. I walked among the pecan trees, listening to the wind in the branches, letting my thoughts settle. I remembered Carter as a boy, running wild through these fields, his laughter echoing over the grass. I remembered telling him that trust was worth more than any fortune. My phone buzzed with messages, some from old friends offering support, others from reporters wanting a quote. I ignored them all. This wasn't about attention or revenge. This was about saving something more important than money or reputation. This was about saving my son's soul, if that was still possible. A week passed. The headlines started small, just a whisper on local financial blogs about accounting irregularities at Lone Star Capital. But soon, national outlets picked up the story. Investors panicked, the company's stocks slid, and Carter's face, once the symbol of youthful ambition, was splashed across business news as the man at the center of a federal probe. Helen watched it all in silence. I could see the pain in her eyes, but she never wavered in her support. Whatever happens, Sam, we did what was right. On the second Friday after my meeting with Agent Hall, the doorbell rang again. This time it was two men in dark jackets, FBI agents. They carried warrants and questions, and their tone was all business. They wanted to know everything, about Carter, about the company, about my own role. The investigation had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. The weeks that followed blurred together, meetings, phone calls, interviews, lawyers, more lawyers. The federal investigation moved with a kind of quiet intensity that made it clear this was no longer a family feud. This was now a matter for the United States government. My phone became a lifeline and a burden, always buzzing with questions, updates, and more than a few veiled threats from former colleagues who didn't want the truth to come out. Helen held me together. She brewed coffee before dawn, held my hand after every long call, and told me, over and over, that doing the right thing was never easy, but always necessary. We stopped going out much. The neighbors tried to pretend nothing was wrong, but I saw them peeking through curtains, whispering to each other at the mailbox. The man who'd once been the pride of Oak Meadows Lane was now the whistleblower, the father who'd turned on his own son. But I never regretted it. Not for a minute. One morning, I was summoned to the federal building in downtown Dallas. Agent Hall and two other investigators met me in a windowless conference room, their faces all business. I'd seen my share of depositions and boardroom brawls, but nothing compared to sitting across from three federal agents with recorders and legal pads. They walked me through every document I'd given them. They asked about Carter's habits, about who else at Lone Star Capital might have known, about conversations I'd had with other executives. Their questions were pointed, but never cruel. I could tell Agent Hall respected what this cost me. Mr. Reed, are you prepared to testify under oath to everything you've told us today? She asked. I looked her in the eye, my voice steady. Yes, ma'am. I've spent my life telling Carter that actions have consequences. That goes for me, too. After the interview, I waited in the building's cafe, sipping burnt coffee, staring out at the city. I felt old, weighed down, but also strangely free. For the first time since this ordeal began, I knew I had done everything I could to stop Carter's lies from hurting anyone else. Meanwhile, Lone Star Capital's world unraveled. The stock dropped nearly 40%. Investors lined up outside Carter's gleaming headquarters, demanding answers. Reporters camped out on the sidewalk, trying to catch a glimpse of the boy wonder CEO who'd built his fortune on sand. The board issued statement after statement, but the truth couldn't be spun anymore. I heard through the grapevine that Carter had locked himself in his penthouse apartment, refusing calls, meeting only with his lawyers. I pictured him there, staring out over the Dallas skyline, clutching at control he no longer had. One afternoon my phone rang. It was Carter. For a moment, I just listened to the silence on the other end. Then, his voice, so familiar and yet suddenly so distant. "Dad, why? Why did you do this?" I took a breath, steadying my hands. "Because, son, the truth matters more than reputation. More than comfort. More than pride." His voice trembled, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You've ruined everything. You could have come to me. We could have fixed this together." "No, Carter," I replied gently but firmly. "You chose this path. I just made sure no one else got hurt because of it." He hung up without another word. That night, Helen and I sat on the porch, the Texas air heavy with summer. "He'll never forgive me," I said, staring into the dark. Helen squeezed my hand. "He might not. But he'll remember. And so will everyone else." Days later, the news broke that federal agents had raided Lone Star Capital's headquarters. Computers were seized. Carter's closest executives were subpoenaed, their careers suddenly as uncertain as the company's future. The entire business world seemed to freeze, waiting for the next shoe to drop. The following week, I received an official letter. I was being called as a witness for the federal grand jury. The day of the hearing, Helen packed me a lunch and kissed my forehead. "Whatever they ask, just tell the truth," she whispered. I promised her I would. I walked into the courthouse, past the marble pillars and the security guards, into a cold room full of strangers. The prosecutor, a tall man with sharp eyes and a soft southern drawl, led me through every detail: my discovery of the documents, my conversations with Carter, my role in the company. The grand jury listened, their faces impassive. Some took notes, others just watched me, an old man caught in the crossfire of ambition and justice. When it was over, the prosecutor shook my hand. "Mr. Reed, you did a brave thing. Not many people would have had the strength." I left the courthouse that day changed. The burden I'd carried for months began to lift, replaced by something else, maybe not peace, but at least the knowledge that I had done my duty. Still, I worried about Carter. About what would come next. I had seen men survive scandals before, but never a storm like this. Helen greeted me at the door, arms wide, heart steady as ever. We sat together, side by side, as dusk fell over Dallas, waiting for the future to arrive. Summer passed in a blur of headlines, subpoenas, and whispered conversations that drifted down every street in Dallas. Helen and I stayed close to home. The porch swing became our refuge, a place where we could hear the cicadas at dusk and pretend, if only for a few moments, that the world outside wasn't collapsing. The grand jury moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. Carter's own handwriting, the same bold script that once filled his childhood notebooks with wild dreams, now served as the backbone of a criminal case. Federal prosecutors built a timeline that showed how the fraud had grown, step by step, until even Carter seemed to lose track of where the truth ended and his ambition began. One morning, Agent Hall called. "Mr. Reed, the grand jury has voted to indict. Formal charges will be announced soon. I wanted you to hear it from me first." I thanked her, though my heart was heavy. That afternoon, I watched the news as they broadcast live from the Lone Star Capitol building. Camera crews crowded the entrance. Reporters, eager for a glimpse of the disgraced CEO, shoved microphones at anyone in a suit. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Carter Reed indicted for securities fraud, federal charges pending." It was surreal, watching my son's name scroll across the bottom of the screen, knowing that I had put it there. But I never doubted what I'd done. Carter had crossed a line, and my duty, to my family, to our employees, and to every honest investor, was clear. The arrest came the following Monday. I learned about it the same way everyone else did, through a news alert on my phone. Carter, stone-faced in a blue suit, hands cuffed in front of him, led past cameras and flashing bulbs, surrounded by federal agents. No more corner office, no more glass tower, just the cold reality of the law. Helen wept quietly at the breakfast table as the story played out on TV. She turned the sound off and reached for my hand. "No one will ever understand what this cost us," she whispered. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was Carter's wife, Allison. Her voice shook. "Sam, I don't know what to do. The kids don't understand. Carter keeps calling for you from the detention center." I closed my eyes, hearing in her words all the pain and confusion I'd feared. "Just take care of the children, Allison. Tell them their grandpa loves them. Tell them their daddy made some bad choices, but he still loves them too." As the legal battle ground forward, I was called to testify again. This time, in a federal courtroom. The space was vast, solemn, filled with polished wood and the quiet weight of justice. I sat in the witness box, hands steady on the rail, as the prosecutor led me through the story of Lone Star Capital from the ground up, the first years, the risks, the sacrifices. And then, step by step, the downfall. Carter watched me from across the room, his face pale, eyes rimmed with red. He never once looked away. The defense tried to paint me as a bitter father, out for revenge. "Mr. Reed," Carter's attorney began, "isn't it true you felt threatened by your son's success? That you wanted control, even after retirement?" I shook my head, voice calm and true. "I built this company for my family. For Carter. But you don't get to rewrite the rules just because you're sitting at the top. The numbers don't lie. And neither do I." The prosecutor finished by displaying the original folder, the one I'd found buried in my desk, the one that started everything. "Is this your handwriting, Mr. Reed?" she asked, holding up a memo I'd written to Carter years before. I smiled sadly. "Yes, ma'am. That's mine. I taught Carter to keep a paper trail. Guess he learned that lesson too well." After I stepped down, I sat with Helen in the gallery, my hand wrapped around hers, as the prosecution made its closing argument. They spoke of trust, of responsibility, of the cost of greed. They reminded the jury that behind every number was a life, families who'd invested their savings, employees who'd built their careers on Lone Star's promise. The verdict came after 3 hours. Carter was found guilty on all counts: securities fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle deep into my bones. In the weeks that followed, Dallas seemed to hold its breath. Lone Star Capital was sold off in pieces. Former board members called to apologize, or to defend their silence. Most just avoided me altogether. I didn't blame them. Everyone had lost something. The sentencing hearing was set for late July. Carter would spend years in a federal facility, maybe not a lifetime, but long enough for him to learn what it meant to be humbled. I visited him once before the sentencing. The detention center was sterile, gray, stripped of the comforts Carter had grown used to. He sat across the glass from me, thinner, older, his hands trembling just a little. "Dad," he whispered. "I'm sorry." I searched his eyes for the boy I'd raised, the man I'd hoped he'd become. "I know you are, son. We all pay for our mistakes. I just hope you use this time to remember who you were before all this." He pressed his forehead to the glass. "Will you ever forgive me?" I let the silence stretch, my heart breaking all over again. "I already have, Carter. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. The truth matters, son. Don't ever forget that again. The guard called time. Carter stood, nodded, and walked away, shoulders bowed under the weight of his choices. Helen and I left the center, the sun hot on our faces, the road ahead uncertain, but our conscience, at last, clear. Carter's sentencing was set for late August, but the days leading up to it moved at a crawl. Helen and I kept to our routines: gardening, early morning walks in the neighborhood, Sunday service at First Methodist, but life was different. We felt it in the awkward silences at the grocery store, in the neighbors' half-hearted waves, in the hush that fell when I walked into the bank. My name, once associated with respect and trust, now came with a shadow. Some folks admired what I'd done, others pitied me, and a few even resented me. But none of it changed my mind. I'd chosen the hard road, and I intended to walk it to the end. The legal process was mercilessly public. News vans parked outside the courthouse day and night. Reporters called at all hours, eager for a quote. I turned them all away. There wasn't anything left to say. The day of sentencing arrived under a sky as hot and bright as any in a Texas summer. Helen and I dressed quietly, her in a blue dress, me in my best suit, the same one I'd worn to Carter's first graduation. We drove downtown without talking, both of us lost in our thoughts. The federal courtroom was packed. Carter sat at the defendant's table, thinner than I'd ever seen him, his hair grown out, his face lined with worry. His attorney whispered last-minute advice, but I could see Carter wasn't listening. He kept glancing over his shoulder at us, at his wife Allison, at the two children sitting stiffly in the row behind their mother. The judge, a tall man with a gentle voice, spoke for nearly an hour, summarizing the charges, the evidence, the damage done. He talked about trust, about the responsibility that comes with leadership. Mr. Reed, your actions have brought pain to many, but they have also shown a harsh light on a system that too often allows ambition to outweigh integrity. When Carter stood for sentencing, the room held its breath. The judge's words landed like stones. For securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy, this court sentences you to 7 years in federal prison, with restitution to the investors and permanent forfeiture of executive privileges. I watched Carter's shoulders drop, saw the last traces of pride fall away. Allison wiped a tear from her cheek, gathering the children close. I caught Carter's eye. For the first time in months, he looked like my son again, vulnerable, scared, painfully human. Afterward, Helen and I stood on the courthouse steps as the media crowded in. For the first time, I spoke. My son made mistakes, serious mistakes, but the responsibility for protecting investors, employees, and the truth belongs to all of us. I did what I had to do. I hope, someday, Carter will understand that justice and forgiveness are two sides of the same coin. We left the crowd behind, finding solace in the quiet of our old Ford as we drove home through sun-baked streets. The phone rang several times, reporters, friends, distant relatives, but I let it go to voicemail. That night, Helen and I sat in the backyard, watching the first stars come out. We talked quietly about the past, about Carter's childhood, about the dreams we once had for our family. Helen squeezed my hand. "Do you regret it?" she asked, voice trembling. "No," I answered. "We didn't just save a company, Helen. We saved a piece of what's right in the world." Days passed. Then weeks. Carter was transferred to a low-security facility in Oklahoma. He wrote us letters, at first short and bitter, then longer, filled with reflection. He talked about the routines of prison, the men he met inside, the books he was reading, the classes he'd started teaching. Slowly, I could see the boy I'd raised re-emerging, stripped of arrogance but not of hope. Allison brought the kids to visit one Saturday. They ran into my arms, both of them asking about their father, their voices full of confusion and longing. I told them the truth, that their daddy had made mistakes, but he loved them more than anything. I promised them he was learning, changing, and that we would always be a family, no matter what. The town gradually moved on. Lone Star Capital was dissolved, its assets used to pay back as many investors as possible. Some folks lost their life savings, others just a little, but everyone lost their faith in what once seemed unbreakable. Neighbors who once avoided us began stopping by again, some with pies, others with apologies. Helen and I took comfort in small acts of kindness: a card from an old friend, a letter from a former employee, a bouquet of sunflowers left on our porch. It was as if, by facing the truth, we'd given permission for others to do the same. I spent my afternoons volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring young men who reminded me of Carter at their age. I told them the story, not just of Lone Star's rise and fall, but of the importance of honesty, of standing up for what's right even when it hurts. One evening, after a long day at the center, I found Helen on the porch, a letter in her lap. It was from Carter. He wrote about regret, about love, about forgiveness. He thanked us for not giving up on him, for reminding him who he was. "I'll come home one day, Dad," the letter ended. "And when I do, I hope you'll be proud of me again." I folded the letter and slipped it into my shirt pocket, feeling its weight settle close to my heart. Helen looked at me, her eyes shining with tears and hope. "He's still our boy, Sam. He always will be." The Texas sky was dark above us, but the stars shone bright. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe in new beginnings. The seasons changed. Autumn crept over Dallas, scattering red and gold leaves through the old neighborhoods, painting new memories over scars that still ached beneath the surface. Helen and I grew used to the quiet, our routine steady, our days punctuated by phone calls with Allison and letters from Carter. The ache of loss dulled into something more bearable, like an old injury that only flares when it rains. Carter wrote every month now. In each letter, he wrote a little less about regret, and a little more about the future. He asked about his children's school projects, about the pecan trees out at the ranch, about Helen's garden and my health. He told me about the woodworking classes he'd started teaching in the prison workshop, how the simple act of shaping rough timber with his hands felt like building something honest for the first time in years. His children visited every other Saturday. At first, those visits were hard. The kids carried a sadness they didn't know how to name, drawing pictures for their father and asking when he'd come home. Over time, though, the visits became brighter. We started traditions: picnics under the oaks, fishing at the local pond, reading books on the porch swing. Allison slowly began to smile again. The house was full of laughter on those weekends, and I could almost believe we were healing. Thanksgiving arrived cold and bright, the kind of morning where the whole world feels sharp and clear. Helen set the table for just four, and we bowed our heads, giving thanks for the good years and the hard ones, for forgiveness, and for the love that endures even when life tests it. That afternoon, as the grandkids played in the yard, I sat with Helen in the kitchen, watching the low sun slant through the window. "Sometimes I wish we could start it all over again," she said quietly. "Raise Carter in a world where he'd never lose his way." I shook my head, smiling gently. "He's found his way back, Helen. Maybe not the way we hoped, but the way he needed. Sometimes the long road is the one that teaches us the most." Christmas came, and with it, another letter from Carter. In careful handwriting, he wrote of hope and forgiveness. He thanked us for every visit, for every story we told the kids, for every sacrifice made and every truth faced. He promised he'd come home better, a father, not just in name, but in heart. That letter brought Helen to tears. She pressed it to her chest, whispering, "It's enough, Sam. We did the right thing." Years passed. Carter was paroled early for good behavior and because of the educational programs he'd started for other inmates. When the day came for him to walk out those prison gates, Helen and I drove north to Oklahoma to meet him. We waited outside the main building, the early morning fog curling over the fields. Carter stepped out carrying nothing but a small duffel bag and the weight of lessons learned. He saw us, really saw us, and his face broke into a smile, shy and grateful. He hugged his mother first, holding her tight, and then turned to me. "Dad," he said, his voice thick. "Thank you for saving me from myself." We drove home together, the three of us. The road stretched out wide and open ahead. Carter asked about the kids, about the ranch, about the future. I listened, feeling the old pride stirring deep in my chest, not because my son was a free man again, but because he had finally found his character, his humility, his heart. Homecoming was not a celebration, but a gentle return. Allison met him at the door, uncertain but hopeful. The children ran to him, clinging to his legs, their questions tumbling over each other. That night, we gathered for supper, all of us together, not as a perfect family but as a whole one, weathered, scarred, but unbroken. Carter took up work with a local nonprofit that helped young people find jobs and second chances. He spent weekends out at the ranch with me, fixing fences, planting new pecan saplings, teaching his son how to whittle a fishing pole from scratch. He gave talks at schools about integrity and the price of shortcuts, always ending with the same words: "Your choices matter." And so does telling the truth, even when it hurts. Helen's health grew fragile as the years passed, but her spirit never dimmed. She lived to see Carter rebuild his life, to watch her grandchildren grow, to hear the sound of laughter echoing through our home again. The last summer she spent with us, she sat under the big oak tree in the yard, smiling as the kids chased each other through the grass. "It was all worth it, Sam," she whispered. "Every single step." After she was gone, Carter and I planted a new tree for her, right beside the old swing. Every spring, when the blossoms appear, we sit together in the shade, talking about the past and dreaming about the future. Now, in the quiet of my old age, I think about the journey we've taken. I think about sacrifice, about legacy, about the things a father owes his son, and the things a son must learn for himself. I've lost much, but I've gained more than I ever expected. I've learned that forgiveness is not forgetting, but loving in spite of the pain. That justice is not revenge, but a path to redemption. Carter's children are nearly grown now. They ask me about their father's story, about the years we lost, about the choices that shaped our family. I tell them the truth, every word, every lesson. I tell them how their father lost his way, and how he found it again. When I sit on the porch at dusk, the sun sinking behind the pecan trees, I know that my life has meant something, not because of the companies I built or the money I earned, but because I stood for what was right, even when it cost me everything. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear Carter's laughter mingling with the children's in the yard, and I know that, in the end, love and truth endure.